Hello everyone, and welcome to NAU Theater's Story Hour, Chapter Books. This is our first day reading some great chapters from some stories from long ago. Today we will be reading The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, The Arabian Nights Tales, The Story of Dr. Dolittle, and A Modern Cinderella, or A Little Old Shoe. Each week, we will be reading chapter books for ages 9 through 12 and classic stories for ages 5 to 8. But we welcome kids of all ages to join us. Check out the titles listed before joining our broadcast. Our readers today are Miss Charlie, Miss Kate, Miss Haley Jo, and me, Miss Kathleen. Let's get started. First up is Miss Charlie.
How Robin Hood Came to be an Outlaw. In merry England, in the time of old, when good King Henry II ruled the land, there lived within the green glades of Sherwood Forest near Nottingham town a famous outlaw whose name was Robin Hood. No archer that ever lived could speed a grey goose shaft with such skill and cunning as his, nor were there ever such yeomen as the 70 merry men that roamed with him through the greenwood shades. Right merrily they dwelled within the depths of Sherwood Forest, suffering neither care nor want, but passing the time in merry games of archery or bouts of cudgel play, living upon the king's venison, washed down with draughts of old ale of October brewing. Not only Robin himself, but the band were outlaws, dwelled apart from other men. Yet they were beloved by the country people round about, for no one ever came to jolly Robin for help in time of need and went away again with an empty fist. And now I will tell how it came to be that Robin fell afoul of the law. When Robin was a youth of 18, stout of sinew and bold of heart, the Sheriff of Nottingham proclaimed a shooting match and offered a prize of a butt of ale to whomsoever should shoot the best shaft in Nottinghamshire. Now, quoth Robin, I will go too, for fain I would draw a string for the bright eyes of my lass, and a butt of good October brewing. So he got and took his good stout yew bow and a score more of broadclothy arrows, and started off from Locksley town through Sherwood Forest to Nottingham. It was at the dawn of day in the merry Maytime, when the hedgerows are green, and flowers bedeck the meadows, daisies pied and yellow cocoa buds, and fair primroses all along the briery hedges, when apple buds blossom and sweet birds sing, the lark at the dawn of day, and the throstle cock and cuckoo, when the lads and lasses look upon each other with sweet thoughts, when busy housewives spread their linen to bleach upon the bright green grass. Sweet was the greenwood as he walked along its path, bright the green and rustling leaves, amid which little birds sang with might and main, and blithe Robin Hood whistled as he trudged along, thinking of Maiden Marian and her bright eyes, for at such times a youth's thoughts are wont to turn pleasantly upon the lass he loves best. As thus he walked along, with a brisk step and a merry whistle, he came suddenly upon some foresters seated beneath a great oak tree. 15 there were in all, making themselves merry with feasting and drinking, as they sat around a huge pasty, to which each man helped himself, thrusting his hand into the pie, and washing down what they had ate with great horns of ale, which they drew all foaming from a barrel that stood nigh. Each man was clad in Lincoln green, and a fine show they made, seated upon sward beneath a fair spreading tree. Then one of them, with his mouth full, called out to Robin, "Halloa! Where goest thou, little lad, with thy 1 penny bow and thy farthing shafts?" Then Robin grew angry, for no stripling likes to be taunted with his green years. "Now," quoth he, "my bow and mine arrows are good and shine, and moreover I go to the shooting match at Nottingham town, where the same has been proclaimed by our good Sheriff of Nottinghamshire. There I will shoot with other stout yeomen for a prize that has been offered of a fine butt of ale." Then the one who held the horn of ale in his hand said, "Ho, listen to the little lad! Why, boy, thy mother's milk is yet scarce dry upon thy lips, and yet thou pratest of standing up with good stout men of Nottingham butts, who art thou scarce able to draw 1 string of a 2-stone bow." "I'll hold the best of your 20 marks," quoth bold Robin, "that I hit the clout at 80 rods, with the good help of Our Lady fair. At this all laughed aloud, and one said, Well boasted, thou fair infant, well boasted, and well thou knowest that no target is nigh to make thy good wager. And another cried, He'll be taking ale with his milk next. At this Robin grew right mad. Hark ye, he said, yonder at thy glade's end, I see a herd of deer, and even more than 80 rods distant. I'll hold you 20 marks by that leave of our fair lady. I cause the best heart among them to die. Now done, cried he who had spoken first, and here are 20 marks I wager thou costest no beast to die, with or without the aid of Our Lady. Then Robin took his good yew bow in hand, and placing the tip at his instep, he strung it right deftly. Then he knocked a broad of cloth-yard arrow, and, raising the bow, drew grey goose feathers to his ear. The next moment the bowstring rang, and the arrow sped down the glade as a sparrow-shark skim in a northern wind. High leaped the noblest heart of all the land, only to fall dead, reddening the green path with his heart's blood. Ha! cried Robin, how likest thou that shot, good fellow? I wot the wager were mine, and it were 300 pounds. Then all of the foresters were filled with rage, and he who had spoken first and had lost the wager was more angry than all. Nay, he cried, the wager's none of thine, and I'll get thee gone straightway, or by the saints of heaven, I'll baste thy sides until thou were never able to walk again. Knowest thou not, said another, that thou hast killed the king's deer, and by the laws of our gracious lord and sovereign King Harry, thine ears should be cut shaven close to thy head. Catch him, cried a third. Nay, said a fourth, let him go, because of his tender years. Never a word said Robin Hood, but he looked at the foresters with a grim face. Then, turning on his heel, he strode away from them and down the forest glade. But his heart was bitterly angry, for his blood was hot and youthful and prone to boil. Now, well it would have been for him who first spoken had he left Robin Hood alone, but his anger was hot, both because of the youth had gotten the better of him, and because of the deep draughts of ale he had been quaffing. So, of a sudden, without any warning, he sprung to his feet, and seized upon the bow and fitted it to a shaft. Aye, cried he, I'll hurry thee anon, and he sent the arrow whistling after Robin. It was well for Robin Hood that the same forester's head was spinning with ale, or else he never would have taken another step. As it was, the arrow whistled within 3 inches of his head, and then he turned around quickly and drew his bow and sent an arrow back in return. Ye said I was no archer, he cried aloud, but say so now again. The shaft flew straight, and the archer fell forward with a cry, and lay on his face upon the ground, his arrows rattling about him out of the quiver, the great goose shaft wet with his heart's blood. Then, before the others could gather around them, Robin Hood was gone into the depths of greenwood. Some started after him, but none with much heart, for each feared to suffer the death of his fellow. So presently they all came and lifted the dead man up, and bore him away to Nottingham town. Meanwhile, Robin Hood ran through the greenwood. Gone was all the joy and brightness for everything, for his heart was sick within him, and it was borne upon his soul that he had slain a man. Alas, cried he, thou hast found me an archer that will make thy wife to ring. I would never that thou hast never said one word to me, or that I had never passed that way, or even that my right forefinger had been stricken off ere that this had happened. In haste I smote, but grieve I sore at leisure. And then, even with his trouble, he remembered the old saw, that what is done, and the egg cracked cannot be cured. And so he came to dwell in Greenwood, that it was to be his home for many years to come, never again to see the town with the lads and lasses of sweet Locksley Town, for he was outlawed, not only because he had killed a man, but also because he had poached upon the king's deer, and 200 pounds were set upon his head as a reward for anyone who would bring him to the court of the king.
Thank you, Miss Charlie. I can't wait to hear the rest of that story. I'm very excited. I love Robin Hood. So stay tuned, everybody. She's going to be reading more of that chapter next week. Next up, we have Kate, Miss Kate, who's going to be reading some other adventure tales.
Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves from the Arabian Nights. In a town in Persia lived two brothers named Qasim and Ali Baba, between whom their father, at his death, had left what little property he possessed, equally divided. Qasim, however, having married the heiress of a rich merchant, became soon after his marriage the owner of a fine shop, together with several pieces of land, and was, in consequence, through no effort of his own, the most considerable merchant in the town. Ali Baba, on the other hand, was married to one as poor as himself, and having no other means of gaining a livelihood, he used to go every day into the forest to cut wood, and laid the wood on the 3 donkeys which were his sole stock in trade, and would then hawk the wood in the streets for sale. One day, while he was at work within the skirts of the forest, Ali Baba saw advancing towards him across the open a large company of horsemen, and fearing from their appearance that they might be robbers, he left his donkeys to their own devices and sought safety for himself in the lower branches of a large tree which grew in the close overshadowing of a precipitous rock. Almost immediately, it became evident that this very rock was the goal toward which the troop was bound, for, having arrived, they alighted instantly from their horses and took down each man of them a sack, which seemed by its weight and form to be filled with gold. There could no longer be any doubt that they were robbers. Ali Baba counted 40 of them. Just as he had done so, the one nearest to him, who seemed to be their chief, advanced toward the rock and in a low but distinct voice muttered the 2 words, "Open, sesame." Immediately the rock opened like a door. The captain and his men passed in, and the rock closed behind them. For a long while, Ali Baba waited, not daring to descend from his hiding place lest they should come out and catch him in the act. But at last, when the waiting had grown almost unbearable, his patience was rewarded. The door in the rock opened, and out came the 40 men, their captain leading them. When the last of them was through, "Shut, sesame," said the captain, and immediately the face of the rock closed together as before. Then they all mounted their horses and rode away. As soon as he felt sure that they were not returning, Ali Baba came down from the tree and made his way at once to that part of the rock where he had seen the captain and his men enter. And there, at the word, "Open, sesame," a door suddenly revealed itself and opened. Ali Baba had expected to find a dark and gloomy cavern. Great was his astonishment, therefore, when he perceived a spacious and vaulted chamber lit from above through a fissure in the rock. And there, spread out before him, lay treasures in profusion, bales of merchandise, silks, carpets, brocades, and above all, gold and silver lying in loose heaps or in sacks piled one upon another. He did not take long to consider what he should do. Disregarding the silver and the gold that lay loose, he brought to the mouth of the cave as many sacks of gold as he thought his 3 donkeys might carry, and having loaded them on and covered them with wood so that they might not be seen, he closed the rock by the utterance of the magic words which he had learned, and departed for the town, a well-satisfied man. When he got home, he drove his donkeys into a small court, and shutting the gates, carefully took off the wood that covered the bags and carried them in to his wife. She, discovering them to be full of gold, feared that her husband had stolen them and began sorrowfully to reproach him. But Ali Baba soon put her mind at rest on that score, and having poured all the gold into a great heap upon the floor, he sat down at her side to consider how well it looked. Soon his wife, careful of body, must needs begin counting it over piece by piece. Ali Baba let her go on for a while, but before long the sight set him laughing. "Wife," said he, "you will never make an end of it that way. The best thing to do is to dig a hole and bury it. Then we shall be sure that it is not slipping through our fingers." "That will do well enough," said his wife, "but it would be better first to have the measure of it. So while you dig the hole, I will go round to Qasim's and borrow a measure small enough to give us an exact reckoning." "Do as you will," answered her husband. but see that you keep the thing a secret." Off went Ali Baba's wife to her brother-in-law's house. Kasim was from home, so she begged of his wife the loan of a small measure, naming for choice the smallest. This set the sister-in-law wondering. Knowing Ali Baba's poverty, she was all the more curious to find out for what kind of grain so small a measure could be needed. So before bringing it, she covered all the bottom with lard, and giving it to Ali Baba's wife, told her to be sure and be quick in returning it. The other, promising to restore it punctually, made haste to get home, and there, finding the hole dug for its reception, she started to measure the money into it. First, she set the measure upon the heap, then she filled it, then she carried it to the hole, and so she continued till the last measure was counted. Then, leaving Ali Baba to finish the burying, she carried back the measure with all haste to her sister-in-law, returning thanks for the loan. No sooner was her back turned than Kasim's wife looked at the bottom of the measure, and there, to her astonishment, she saw sticking to the lard a gold coin. "What?" she cried, her heart filled with envy. "Is Ali Baba so rich that he needs a measure for his gold? Where, then, I would know, has the miserable wretch obtained it?" She waited with impatience for her husband's return, and as soon as he came in, she began to jeer at him. "You think yourself rich," said she, "but Ali Baba is richer. You count your gold by the piece, but Ali Baba does not count. He measures it. In comparison to Ali Baba, we are but grubs and groundlings." Having thus riddled him to the top of her bent in order to provoke his curiosity, she told him the story of the borrowed measure, of her own stratagem, and of its result. Kasim, instead of being pleased at Ali Baba's sudden prosperity, grew furiously jealous. Not a wink could he sleep all night for thinking of it. The next morning, before sunrise, he went to his brother's house. "Ali Baba," said he, "what do you mean by pretending to be poor when all the time you are scooping up gold by the quart?" "Brother," said Ali Baba, "explain your meaning." "My meaning shall be plain," cried Kasim, displaying the telltale coin. "How many pieces have you like this that my wife found sticking to the bottom of the measure yesterday?" Ali Baba, perceiving that the intervention of wives had made further concealment useless, told his brother the true facts of the case, and offered him, as an inducement for keeping the secret, an equal share of the treasure. "That is the least that I have the right to expect," answered Kasim haughtily. "It is further necessary that you should tell me exactly what the treasure lies, that I may, if need be, test the truth of your story. Otherwise, I shall find it my duty to denounce you to authorities." Ali Baba, having a clear conscience, had little fear of Kasim's threats, but out of pure good nature, he gave him all the information he desired, not forgetting to instruct him in the words which would give him free passage into the cave and out again. Kasim, who had thus secured all he had come for, lost no time in putting his project into execution. Intent on possessing himself of all the treasures which yet remained, he set off the next morning before daybreak, taking with him 10 mules laden with empty crates. Arrived before the cave, he recalled the words which his brother had taught him. No sooner was "Open, sesame!" said than the door in the rock lay wide for him to pass through, and when he had entered, it shut again. If the simple soul of Ali Baba had found delight in the riches of the cavern, greater still was the exaltation of a greedy nature like Kasim's. Intoxicated with the wealth that lay before his eyes, he had no thought but to gather together with all speed as much treasure as the 10 mules would carry. And so, having exhausted himself with heavy labor and avaricious excitement, he suddenly found on returning to the door that he had forgotten the key which opened it. Up and down and in and out through the mazes of his brain, he chased the missing word. Barley and maize and rice. He thought of them all, but of sesame, never once, because his mind had become dark to the revealing light of heaven. And so the door stayed fast, holding him prisoner in the cave, where to his fate, undeserving of pity, we leave him. Toward noon, the robbers returned and saw, standing about the rock, the 10 mules laden with crates. At this, they were greatly surprised and began to search with suspicion amongst the surrounding crannies and undergrowth. Finding no one there, they drew their swords and advanced cautiously toward the cave, where, upon the captain's pronouncement of the magic word, the door immediately fell open. Kasim, who from within had heard the trampling of horses, had now no doubt that the robbers were arrived and that his hour was come. Resolved, however, to make one last effort to escape, he stood ready by the door, and no sooner had the opening word been uttered than he sprang forth with such violence that he threw the captain to the ground. But his attempt was vain. Before he could break through, he was mercilessly hacked down by the swords of the robber band. With their fears thus verified, the robbers anxiously entered the cave to view the traces of its late visitant. There they saw piled by the door the treasure which Cassim had sought to carry away, but while restoring this to its place, they failed altogether to detect the earlier loss which Ali Baba had caused them. Reckoning, however, that as one had discovered the secret of entry, others also might know of it, they determined to leave an example for any who might venture thither on a similar errand. And having quartered the body of Cassim, they disposed of it at the entrance in a manner most calculated to strike horror into the heart of the beholder. Then, closing the door of the cave, they rode away in the search of fresh exploits and plunder. Meanwhile, Cassim's wife had grown very uneasy at her husband's prolonged absence, and at nightfall, unable to endure further suspense, she ran to Ali Baba and, telling him of his brother's secret expedition, entreated him to go out instantly in search of him. Ali Baba had too kind a heart to refuse or delay comfort to her affliction. Taking with him his 3 donkeys, he set out immediately for the forest, and as the road was familiar to him, he had soon found his way to the door of the cave. When he saw there the traces of blood, he became filled with misgiving, but no sooner had he entered than his worst fears were realized. Nevertheless, brotherly pity gave him courage. Gathering together the severed remains and wrapping them about with all possible decency, he laid them upon one of the donkeys. Then, bethinking him that he deserved some payment for his pains, he loaded the 2 remaining donkeys with sacks of gold and covered them with wood as on the first occasion, made his way back to the town while it was yet early. Leaving his wife to dispose of the treasure borne by the 2 donkeys, he led the third to his sister-in-law's house, and knocking quietly so that none of the neighbors might hear, was presently admitted by Morgiana, a female slave whose intelligence and discretion had long been known to him. "Morgiana," said he, "there's trouble on the back of that donkey. Can you keep a secret?" And Morgiana's nod satisfied him better than any oath. "Well," said he, "your master's body lies there waiting to be pieced, and our business now is to bury him honorably as though he had died a natural death. Go and tell your mistress that I want to speak to her."
Thank you, Kate. Again, we're going to hear more about Ali Baba and the stories about finding gold and the adventure stories coming up. Next up is the story of Dr. Dolittle that I'm going to read, and it's written by Hugh Lofting. Lofting wrote this story about Dr. Dolittle, and when I was a little kid, I loved this story, and I would read it all the time, and then they made a movie, and you may have seen some of the movies since. There's been a couple of versions, but this doll was from that period. This is an actor named Rex Harrison, who played Dr. Dolittle in the original film. So he's going to sit here and join us today as we tell his story of Dr. Dolittle. The first chapter, Puddleby. Once upon a time, many, many years ago, when our grandfathers were little children, there was a doctor, and his name was Dolittle, John Dolittle, M.D. M.D. means he was a proper doctor and knew a whole lot. He lived in a little town called Puddleby on the marsh. All the folks, young and old, knew him well by sight. And whenever he walked down the street in his high hat, everyone would say, "There goes the doctor. He's a clever man." And the dogs and the children would all run up and follow behind him. And even the crows that lived in the church tower would caw and nod their heads. The house he lived in, on the edge of town, was quite small, but his garden was very large and had a wide lawn and stone seats and weeping willows hanging over. His sister, Sarah Dolittle, was his housekeeper, but the doctor looked after the garden himself. He was very fond of animals and kept many kinds of pets. Besides the goldfish in the pond, at the bottom of the pond, in his garden, he had rabbits in the pantry, a white mouse in his piano, a squirrel in his linen closet, a hedgehog in the cellar. He had a cow and a calf too, and an old lame horse, 25 years of age, and chickens and pigeons and 2 lambs, and many, many other animals. But his favorite pets were Dab Dab the duck, Jib the dog, Gub Gub the baby pig, and Polynesia the parrot. Oh, and the owl, Tutu. His sister used to grumble all about these animals and said they made his house untidy. And one day, when an old lady with rheumatism came to see the doctor, she sat on the hedgehog who was sleeping on the sofa, and she never came to see Dr. Dolittle anymore, but drove every Saturday all the way to Oxenthorpe, another town almost 10 miles away, to see the doctor there. Then his sister, Sarah Dolittle, came to him and said, "John, how can you expect sick people to come and see you when you keep all these animals in the house? It's a fine doctor who would have his parlor full of hedgehogs and mice. That's the 4th personage these animals have driven away. Squire Jenkins and the parson say they wouldn't come near this house again, no matter how sick they are. We are getting poorer every day. If you go on like this, none of the best people will have you for a doctor." "But I like animals better than people," said the doctor. "You are ridiculous," said his sister, and walked out of the room. So as time went on, the doctor got more and more animals, and the people who came to see him got less and less, till at last he had no one left, except for the cat's meat man, who didn't mind any kind of animals. But the cat's meat man wasn't very rich, and he only got sick once a year at Christmas time, when he used to give the doctor 6 pence for a bottle of medicine. 6 pence a year wasn't enough to live on, even in those days, long ago. And if the doctor hadn't had some money saved up in his money box, no one knows what would have happened. And he kept on getting still more pets. And of course, it cost a lot to feed them. And the money he had saved up grew littler and littler. And then he sold his piano, and he moved the mouse that lived in the piano into the bureau drawer. But the money even got smaller and smaller, and it soon began to go. So he sold his brown suit that he wore on Sundays and went on to become poorer and poorer. And now, when he walked down that street in his high hat, people would say to one another, "There goes Dr. Dolittle, M.D. There was a time when he was the best doctor in the West County. Look at him now. He hasn't any money, and his stockings are full of holes." But the dogs and the cats and the children still ran up and followed him throughout the town, the same as they had done when he was rich. The second chapter, Animal Language. It happened one day that the doctor was sitting in his kitchen talking with the cat's meat man, who had come to see him with a stomachache. "Why don't you give up being a people doctor and be an animal doctor?" asked the cat's meat man. The parrot, Polynesia, was sitting on the window looking out at the rain and singing a sailor song to herself. She stopped singing and started to listen. "You see, doctor," the cat's meat man went on, "you know all about animals. much more than what these vets here do. That book you wrote about cats, why, it was wonderful. I can't read or write myself, or maybe I'd write some books. But my wife, Theodosia, she's a scholar. She is. And she read your book to me. Well, it was wonderful. That's all that can be said. Wonderful. You might have been a cat yourself. You know, the way you think. And listen, you can make a lot of money doctoring animals. Do you know that? You see, I'd send all the old women who had sick cats or dogs to you. And if they didn't get sick fast enough, I could put something in the meat I sell them and make them sick, see? Oh, no, said the doctor quickly. You mustn't do that. That wouldn't be right. Oh, I didn't mean real sick, answered the cat's meat man. Just a little something to make 'em droopy, like what I had reference to. But as you say, maybe it ain't quite fair to the animals, but they'll get sick because the old women always give 'em too much to eat. And look, all the farmers around here who had lame horses and weak lambs, they'd come. Be an animal doctor. When the cat's meat man had gone, the parrot flew off the window to the doctor and sat on the table and said, that man's got sense. That's what you ought to do. Be an animal doctor. Give the silly people, if they haven't brains enough to see that you're the best doctor in the world, but take care of animals instead. They'll soon find out. Be an animal doctor? Bah. Oh, there are plenty of animal doctors, said John Dolittle, putting the flower pots outside on the windowsill to get some rain. Yes, there are plenty, said Polynesia, but none of them are any good at all. Now listen, doctor, and I'll send something, and I'll say something too. Did you know that animals can talk? Well, I knew parrots could talk, said the doctor. Oh, we parrots, we talk in two languages, people's language and bird language, said Polynesia proudly. If I say, Polly want a cracker, you understand me. But hear this. Cock-cock-cooey, fee-fee. Good gracious, cried the doctor. What does that mean? That means, is the porridge hot yet in bird language? My, you don't say so, said the doctor. You never talked that way to me before. What wouldn't have been any good, said Polynesia, dusting some cracker crumbs off her left wing. You wouldn't have understood me if I had, but tell me some more, said the doctor, all excited, and he rushed over to the dresser drawer and came back with a butcher's book and a pencil. Now don't go too fast. I'll write it down. This is interesting, very, very interesting, something quite new. Give me the birds ABC first, slowly now. So that was the way the doctor came to know that animals had a language of their own and could talk to one another. And all that afternoon, while it was raining, Polynesia sat on the kitchen table giving him bird words to put down in his book. At tea time, when the dog, Jip, came in, the parrot said to the doctor, See, he's talking to you. Looks to me like he's there scratching his ear, said the doctor. But animals don't always speak with their mouths, said the parrot in a high voice, raising her eyebrows. They talk with their ears, with their feet, with their tails, with everything. Sometimes they don't want to make a noise. Do you see now the way he's twitching up one side of his nose? What's that mean? asked the doctor. That means, can't you see that it's stopping raining? Polynesia answered. He's asking you a question. Dogs nearly always use their noses when they're asking questions. After a while, with the parrot's help, the doctor got to learn the language of animals so that they could talk to them. He could talk to them himself and understand everything they said. Then he gave up being a people's doctor altogether. As soon as the cat's meat man had told everyone that John Dolittle was going to become an animal doctor, old ladies began to bring them their pet pugs and poodles who had eaten too much cake, and farmers from many miles away to show him their sick cows and sheep. One day, a plow horse was brought to him, and the poor thing was terribly glad to find a man who could talk in horse language. "You know, doctor," said the horse, "the vet over the hill knows nothing at all. He's been treating me 6 weeks now for spavins. Ugh, what I need is spectacles. I'm going blind in one eye. There's no reason why horses shouldn't wear glasses, the same as people. But that stupid man over the hill never even looked in my eyes. He kept giving me big pills. I tried to tell him he couldn't understand a word of horse language. What I need is spectacles." Of course, said the doctor. "I'll get you some at once." "I would like a pair like yours," said the horse, "only green. They'll keep the sun out of my eyes while I'm plowing the 50-acre field." "Certainly," said the doctor. "Green ones you shall have." "You know, the trouble is, sir," said the plow horse, as the doctor opened the front door to let him out. "The trouble is that anybody thinks he can doctor animals just because animals don't complain. As a matter of fact, it takes much cleverer man to be really good animal doctor, and than it does to be a good people doctor. My farmer's boy thinks he knows all about horses. I wish you could see him. His face is so fat he looks as though he had no eyes, and he's got as much brain as a potato bug. He tried to put mustard plaster on me last week." "What did he put?" asked the doctor. "Oh, he didn't put it anywhere on me," said the horse. "He only tried to. I kicked him into the duck pond." Well, said the doctor. "I'm pretty quiet creature as a rule," said the horse. "Very patient with people. Don't make such a fuss. But it was bad enough to have that vet giving me the wrong medicine. And then the red-faced booby started to monkey with me. I couldn't bear it any more." "Did you hurt the boy?" asked the doctor. "Oh, no," said the horse. "I kicked him in the right place. The vet's looking at him now. When will my glasses be ready?" "I'll have them for you next week," said Doctor. "Come in again Tuesday morning." Then John Dolittle got a fine, big pair of green spectacles, and the plow horse stopped going blind in one eye and could see as clever as ever. And soon it became a common sight to see farm animals wearing glasses in the county round Puddleby, and a blind horse was a thing unknown. And so it was with all other animals that were brought to him. As soon as they found that he could talk their language, they told him where their pain was and how they felt, and of course it was easy for him to cure them. Now, all these animals went back and told their brothers and friends that there was a doctor in a little house with a big garden, and he was a really good doctor. And whenever any creatures got sick, not only horses and cows and dogs, but all the things of the fields, like harvest mice and water voles and badgers and bats, they came at once to his house on the edge of town, so that his big garden was nearly always crowded with animals trying to get in to see him. There were so many that came that he had to have special doors made for different kinds of animals. He wrote horses over the front door, cows over the side door, and sheep on the kitchen door. Each kind of animal had a separate door. Even the mice had a tiny little tunnel made for them into the cellar where they waited patiently in rows so that the doctor could come around to see them. And so, in a few years' time, every living thing for miles and miles got to know John Dolittle, MD. And the birds who flew to other countries in the winter told the animals in foreign lands of this wonderful doctor in Puddleby on the marsh, who could understand their talk and help them in their troubles. In this way, he became famous among the animals all over the world, better known even than he had been to the folks in the West County. And he was happy, and he liked his life very much. One afternoon, when the doctor was busy writing in his book, Polynesia sat on the window, as she nearly always did, looking out at the leaves blowing in the garden. Presently, she laughed out loud. "What is it, Polynesia?" asked the doctor, looking up from his book. "I was just thinking," said the parrot, as she went on looking at the leaves. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about people," said Polynesia. "People make me sick. They think they're so wonderful. The world has been going on now for thousands of years, hasn't it? And only one thing in animal language that people have learned to understand is that when a dog wags his tail, he means I'm glad. It's funny, isn't it? You are the very first man to talk to us. Oh, sometimes people annoy me dreadfully. Such airs they put on, talking about the dumb animals. Dumb. Huh. Why, I knew a macaw once who would say good morning in 7 different languages without opening his mouth. He could talk every language, and Greek. The old professor with a gray beard bought him, but he didn't stay. He said the old man didn't talk Greek right, and he couldn't stand listening to him teach language wrong. I wonder what's become of him. That bird knew more geography than people will ever know. People. Golly! Well, I suppose if people ever learn to fly like any common hedge sparrow, we'll never hear the end of it. You're a wise old bird, said the doctor. How old are you really? I know that parrots and elephants sometimes live to be very old. I never can be quite sure of my age, said Polynesia. It's either 183 or 182. But I know that when I first came from Africa, King Charles was still hiding in that oak tree because I saw him. He looked scared to death. And that is the end of the chapter 2, and we're going to continue with that one next week. So next up, we have Haley Jo Lapine, who's going to be reading a very different story written by Louisa May Alcott.
Hello friends, I'm Miss Haley, and I'm going to be reading to you today A Modern Cinderella or The Little Old Shoe and Other Stories by Louisa May Alcott. How It Was Lost. Among green New England hills stood an ancient house, many gabled, mossy-roofed, and quaintly built, but picturesque and pleasant to the eye, for a brook ran babbling through the orchard that encompassed it about, a garden plat stretched upward to the whispering birches on the slope, and patriarchal elms stood sentinel upon the lawn as they had stood almost a century ago, when the Revolution rolled that way and found them young. One summer morning, when the air was full of country sounds of mowers in the meadow, blackbirds by the brook, and the low of kine upon the hillside, the old house wore its cheeriest aspect, and a certain humble history began. Nan! Yesty! And a head, brown-locked, blue-eyed, soft-featured, looked into the open door to answer the call. Just bring me the third volume of Wilhelm Meister, that's a dear. It's hardly worthwhile to rouse such a restless ghost as I when I'm fairly laid." As she spoke, Dee pulled up her black braids, thumped the pillow of the couch where she was lying, and with eager eyes went down the last page of her book. "Nan!" "Yes, Laura," replied the girl, coming back with the third volume for the literary cormorant, who took it with a nod, still too content upon the Confessions of a Fair Saint to remember the failings of a certain plain sinner. "Don't forget the Italian cream for dinner, I depend upon it, for it's the only thing fit for me this hot weather." And Laura, the cool blonde, disposed the folds of her white gown more gracefully about her, and touched up the eyebrow of her Minerva she was drawing. "Little daughter." "Yes, father." "Let me have plenty of clean collars in my bag, for I must go at once. And some of you bring me a glass of cider in about an hour. I shall be in the lower garden." The old man went away into his imaginary paradise, and Nan into domestic purgatory on a summer day, the kitchen. There were vines about the windows, sunshine on the floor, and order everywhere. But it was haunted by a cooking stove, that family altar whence such varied incense rises to appease the appetite of household gods, for which such dire incantations are pronounced to ease the wrath and woe of the priestess of the fire, and about which often linger saddest memories of wasted temper, time, and toil. Nan was tired, having risen with the birds, hurried, having many cares those happy little housewives never know, and disappointed in a hope that hourly dwindled, peaked, and pined. She was too young to make the anxious lines upon her forehead seem at home there, too patient to be burdened with the labor others should have shared, too light of heart to be pent up when earth and sky were keeping a blithe holiday. She was one of that meek sisterhood who, thinking humbly of themselves, believe they are honored by being spent in the service of less conscientious souls, whose careless thanks seem quite reward enough. To and fro she went, silent and diligent, giving the grace of willingness to every humble or distasteful task the day had brought her. But some malignant sprite seemed to have taken possession of her kingdom, for rebellion broke out everywhere. The kettles would boil obstreperously, the mutton refused to cook with the meek alacrity to be expected from the nature of the sheep, the stove, with unnecessary warmth of temper, would glow like a fiery furnace, the irons would scorch, the linens would dry, then the spirits would fail, though patience never. Nan tugged on, growing hotter and wearier, more hurried and more hopeless, till at last the crisis came, for in one fell moment she tore her gown, burnt her hand, and smudged the collar she had been preparing to finish in the most unexceptionable style. Then, if she had been a nervous woman, she would have scolded. Being a gentle girl, she only lifted up her voice and wept. "Behold, she watereth her linen with salt tears, and bewaileth herself because of much tribulation. But lo, help cometh from afar, a strong man withal, and clasheth cymbals, that she may dance for joy." The voice came from the porch, and with her hope fulfilled, Nan looked up to meet John Lord, the house friend, who stood there with a basket on his arm, and as she saw his honest eyes, kind lips, and helpful hands, the girl thought this plain young man was the comeliest, most welcome sight she had beheld that day. "How good of you to come through all this heat and not laugh at my despair," she said, looking up like a grateful child as she led him in. "I only obey orders, Nan, for a certain dear old lady had a motherly presentiment that you had got into a domestic whirlpool and sent me as a sort of life preserver. So I took the basket of consolation and came to fold my feet upon the carpet of contentment in the tent of friendship." As he spoke, John gave his own gift in his mother's name and bestowed himself in the wide window seat, where morning glories nodded at him and old butternuts sent pleasant shadows dancing to and fro. His advent, like that of Orpheus in Hades, seemed to soothe all unpropitious powers with a sudden spell. The fire began to slacken, the kettles began to lull, the meat began to cook, the irons began to cool, the clothes began to behave, and the spirits began to rise, and the collar was finished off with the most triumphant success. John watched the change, and though a lord of creation, abased himself to take compassion on the weaker vessel, and was seized with a great desire to Lyre the homely task that tried her strength of body and soul. He took a comprehensive glance around the room, then, extracting a dish from the closet, proceeded to imbrue his hands in the strawberry's blood. "Oh, John, you needn't do that. I shall have time when I've turned the meat, made the pudding, and done these things. See, I'm getting on finely now. You're a judge of such matters. Isn't that nice?" As she spoke, Nan offered the polished absurdity for inspection with innocent pride. "Oh, that I were a collar to sit upon that hand," sighed John, adding argumentatively, "As to the berry question, I might answer it with a gem from Dr. Watts, relative to Satan in idle hands, but I will merely say that, as a matter of public safety, you'd better leave me alone, for such is the destructiveness of my nature that I shall certainly eat something hurtful, break something valuable, or sit upon something crushable, unless you let me concentrate my energies by knocking on these young fellows' hats and preparing them for their doom." Looking at the matter in a charitable light, Nan consented and went cheerfully on with her work, wondering how she could have thought ironing an infliction, and been so ungrateful for the blessings of her lot. "Where's Sally?" asked John, looking vainly for the functionary who usually pervaded that region like a domestic policewoman, a terror to cats, dogs, and men. "She's gone to her cousin's funeral and won't be back till Monday. There seems to be a great fatality among her relations, for one dies or comes to grief in some way about once a month. But I don't blame poor Sally for wanting to get away from this place now and then. I think I could find it in my heart to murder an imaginary friend or two if I had to stay long." And Nan laughed so blithely it was a pleasure to hear her. "Where's Dee?" asked John, seized with a most unmasculine curiosity all at once. "She's in Germany with Wilhelm Meister, but, though lost to sight to memory clear, for I was just thinking as I did her things how clever she is to like all kinds of books that I don't understand at all, and to write things that make me cry with pride and delight. Yes, she is a talented dear, though she hardly knows a needle from a crowbar, and will make herself one great blot some of these days when the divine afflatus descends upon her, I'm afraid." And Anne rubbed away with sisterly zeal at Dee's forlorn hose and inky pocket handkerchiefs. "Where is Laura?" proceeded the inquisitor. "Well, I might say she is in Italy, for she is copying some fine thing of Raphael or Michelangelo's or some great creature or the other. And she looks so picturesque in her pretty gown, sitting before her easel, that it's really a sight to behold, and I've peeped 2 or 3 times to see how she gets on." And Nan bestirred herself to prepare the dish wherewith her picturesque sister desired to prolong her artistic existence. "Where is your father?" John asked again, checking off each answer with a nod and a little frown. "He is down in the garden, deep in some plan about melons, the beginning of which seems to consist in stamping the first proposition in Euclid all over the bed, and then poking a few seeds into the middle of each. Why, bless the dear man, I thought it was time for the cider. Wouldn't you like to take it to him, John? He'd love to consult you, and the lane is so cool, it does one's heart good to look at it." John glanced from the steamy kitchen to the shadowy path and answered with a sudden assumption of immense industry. "I couldn't possibly go, Nan. I've got so much on my hands. You have to do it yourself. Mr. Robert Lincoln has something for your private ear, and the lane is so cool, it will do one's heart good to see it. Give my regards to your father, and, in the words of little Mabel's mother, with slight variation, tell the dear old body this day I cannot run, for the pots are boiling over, and the mutton isn't done." "I will, but John, go in to the girls and be comfortable, for I don't like to leave you here," said Nan. "You insinuate that I should pick at the pudding or invade the cream, do you? Ungrateful girl, leave me!" And with melodramatic sternness, John extinguished her and his broad-brimmed hat and offered the glass like a poisoned goblet. Nan took it and went smiling away, but the lane might have been the desert of Sahara for all she knew of it. She would have passed her father as unconcerned as if he had been an apple tree had he not called out. And that is where we're ending today. Thank you for coming.
I hope you all had fun listening to these great chapters and adventure stories. Join us next week as we continue with these tales. Parents and friends, Story Hour is NAU Theater's project to give back to the community, locally and beyond. We thank you for joining us, and if you like what you see, please share our video widely. Also, you may like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All our stories are in public domain. If you'd like to get a copy, check out the Gutenberg Library Project and other online public domain resources. Until next time, keep reading. Bye.